time for us. How does Pakistan see the Taliban takeover in Afghanistan?
Well, we are closely monitoring the situation, and obviously right now we are focused on helping the international community with the evacuation of people who wish to leave Afghanistan. So for now, I think the focus really is on working with the international community to facilitate those who wish to leave Afghanistan.
How worried are you about a huge influx of refugees into Pakistan? Because you had that in the past. I remember that there were huge refugee camps of Afghans coming to Pakistan during the war.
Not just in the past, even as we speak, we have over 3 million Afghan refugees, 1.5 million registered Afghan refugees living in Pakistan. So this was and this continues to be a concern because, as you know, Pakistan is a poor country and we have been supporting the refugees from our own resources over the years, and not just in terms of hosting refugees, but also in terms of the very heavy price that we have paid on account of unfortunate conflict in Afghanistan. In Pakistan, I can tell you, after Afghanistan is one country that has lost 80,000 lives. The economic cost of the conflict has been close to $150 billion for our economy. And there are certain other costs that are not even tangible. So in that way, anything that happens in Afghanistan is a source of concern for us. And in fact, for that reason, and for that reason alone, Pakistan has been the most ardent advocate of an inclusive peace process in Afghanistan.
Which apparently, of course, we all know did not happen, in part because of the refusal of the Afghani government. If I may ask, tomorrow, of course, we will have the conference of the G7 virtually, discussing how to deal with the refugee problems, how to support countries surrounding Afghanistan. What do you expect from the G7?
I think right now what is really important is to make sure that things don't fall apart in Afghanistan, that the crisis doesn't turn into a humanitarian catastrophe, and that all the key players and stakeholders are talking to each other closely in encouraging and, as if necessary, nudging all the Afghan parties, and particularly Taliban now that they are in control in Afghanistan, to work towards an inclusive and all-embracing government where all ethnicities, all Afghan ethnicities are represented.
Some of the Western countries have the feeling that Pakistan has supported the Taliban over the last couple of years, giving money, giving them shelter to stay on the Pakistani side of the border. How much of support has Pakistan given the Taliban?
You know, again, I think if we, as I said, we've been home to Afghans, millions of Afghans for the past 40 years. It didn't start in 2001. Since after the Soviet invasion, we have been host to millions of Afghans. So Pakistan has been, in a way, a matter of sorts, a kind of a safe haven for all Afghans. Even today, as we speak, Pakistan is still the destination of choice. With many Afghans, no matter what their political orientation or denomination is, interested in coming to Pakistan. So that way, but if what you mean by support is the active support of the government of Pakistan, we have maintained that consistently. We do have relationship with Taliban, but we don't really either control them, we have not bankrolled them, they are not on our payrolls. And the events, I would say, of past few weeks have actually very clearly demonstrated that unfortunately Pakistan was used as an afterthought or as an excuse by successive Afghan governments, more as a diversion or a scapegoat for their inadequacies, failures, and deficiencies of governance and corruption. So, and this is really a moment of reflection, I would say, for all the coalition forces. But then we don't want to get into that blame game right now. As I said, right now what is really important is for the international community to come together to make sure that things do not fall apart, to encourage Afghan parties, because really I think what is important for us to learn from history is that victories are temporary and transient in Afghanistan.
Of course, there's a lot of blaming going on right now within Germany, for example, within the United States. Who's to blame for that? So forgive me if I ask one more question about that. Do you think that we all turn a blind eye to the problems with the Afghani government, corruption, and all those things?
I would say that it's time, or perhaps at some other more convenient time, because right now the focus should be to facilitate those who wish to leave, to focus is on basically ensuring that the situation doesn't become a humanitarian crisis. But once this is behind us, I think it is for everyone to perhaps dust up all those special Inspector General reports that have been coming out over the years, pointing out to a lot of inadequacies and a lot of corruption going on. So, but this is not for us to say, because this is for those whose public money went into that.
Last week, of course, the first reaction from Pakistan was number one, an official government reaction. But at the same time, the Prime Minister also, in a speech, when he was talking about I would say, the bad influence of English on the culture and the schools in Pakistan, he made this remark saying Afghans have broken the shackles of slavery. So is he supportive, celebrating this new government in Afghanistan?
Again, and it's really both interesting and I would say sad also that, and I have been hearing that in the United States also, references being made to statements being issued mostly in the social media. What I would draw your attention is to at least 200 statements that our Prime Minister has issued, not just in the recent past, but over the last 20 years, of how he has always advocated that there never was a military solution to the conflict in Afghanistan, and how Pakistan has actually consistently supported and encouraged all Afghan parties to talk to each other. In fact, the day these events were unfolding in Kabul, almost all the so-called non-Pashtun leaders arrived in Islamabad to talk to the Pakistani government. And that was basically our way of very clearly signaling to everybody that Pakistan has no favorites in Afghanistan.
But is Pakistan happy that the foreigners are leaving the region?
Again, I think this is also something that we have consistently said and maintained, that we were for a responsible withdrawal. We do not and did not support a precipitate withdrawal, and ideally we would have seen, we would have liked to see the withdrawal synchronized with the progress in the peace process.
Looking forward, and you mentioned that this is the most important part, the President is now saying, well, we have to make two things sure. One is, and we talked about this, the cooperation with regards to the refugee situation, but number two, also make sure that never again terrorism can grow in Afghanistan and also have an impact on the rest of the world. How much can Pakistan work with the United States on that issue?
Oh yes, absolutely. I think terrorism is an abiding concern, and frankly that essentially drove our approach to that the best counter-terrorism investment in Afghanistan is to invest in peace in Afghanistan. Because if you don't have peace and things unravel in Afghanistan, you will have these ungoverned spaces where these terrorist groups could potentially find safe haven, and that's what we have seen in the past. So for us, an inclusive government is really the way to ensure long-term stability in Afghanistan. Pakistan has cooperated in the past with the international community in fighting terrorism. As I said, we have paid a very, very heavy price, and we will continue to cooperate because we see threatened by the same groups that the Western countries and other countries in the region are.
How far will Pakistan go in that? If, let's say, there are terrorist groups in Afghanistan who rise again, who plot and maybe prepare for attacks in other countries, including Pakistan, for example, would you lend military support to the United States? Would you give them, would you share intelligence with the US to help fight that kind of terrorism?
Again, I think we would like to focus right now on creating conditions that do not lead the world to that point where we or anyone else has to basically go in to meet that terrorist threat. And working with the Taliban, we have given a commitment to the international community that our territory would not be used against anyone, and we would hope that whosoever forms government in Afghanistan will also make sure that the Afghan territory is not used against any country. And if you have a stable partner by way of a government in Afghanistan, I think our ability to work with a willing government will increase the prospects of counter-terrorism cooperation more rather than less.
How would Pakistan react if the new government, maybe led by the Taliban in Afghanistan, would violate human rights and commit atrocities, for example, against women in Afghanistan? How would you react?
For now, what we are seeing, I think the signs and signals that we are getting from Afghanistan, particularly Kabul, I think are positive. Taliban seem to be listening to and sensitive to the concerns of the international community. I was on my way here. I just saw this short video clip released by the Taliban spokesperson on the girls going to school in Kabul. And the clip that he issued with that is also interesting, that this is the new Afghanistan. So we would, I think, like other members of the international community, hold Taliban to the commitments and promises that they have made, and we do hope that they live by those promises and commitments.
Pakistan had its own experience with the Taliban. I remember the time when the Swat Valley was basically occupied under Taliban rule for a while. Plenty of atrocities were committed back then, and it took the Pakistani army a lot of effort, a lot of blood of good soldiers in order to liberate the Swat Valley. Are you in any way concerned that the old Taliban, that's the one that we saw in Swat Valley, poses a threat to Pakistan as well?
I would say that that's not us, really. I think that was more of an aberration. That was more of a deviation from who we are and what our society is. We are religious, I think, by definition, but we are not dogmatic or as conservative as that small group was back then. And I think the society did come back to its normal self. And I do remember, back then I was in New York at that time, and it was probably 2009 or sometime around that. And there were editorials being written here about the likelihood of Taliban taking over Islamabad. And I really invite you to come back to Pakistan to see that we have cleared and cleansed all the tribal agencies. They have been formally integrated into the mainstream Pakistan and the provincial territory. We have built a complete fence on our border, which is perhaps one of the most treacherous borders in the world, covering almost 1,600 miles to make sure that no one crosses over or no one comes into our territory. So, and our army has rehabilitated those areas completely. So, really, if one were to go back to see how much ground we have covered, I think that would give you the answer to your question, because really that those fears were unfounded, and I would say even today the political parties in Pakistan and the mainstream political thought in Pakistan is different from the kind of image or impression that many have of Taliban.
Finally, looking at the big picture, of course, how important, there is a lot of talk that Pakistan has good relationships not only with the United States but also with China. What is the more important partner from you, and what do you expect from those countries in the future?
We really want to be in a position where we don't have to pick one over the other. Pakistan has had very close relationships both with the United States and China. In fact, we were the bridge, we were the country that brought China and United States together. This historic Dr. Henry Kissinger's trip to Beijing from Islamabad. And we see that there is enough space in South Asia, and particularly in Pakistan, for these two countries to coexist in terms. And we certainly would want to welcome both China and the United States as our close partners. And I think more importantly, coming back to the main subject of our conversation today, which is Afghanistan, I think Afghanistan is one place where we would want to see international community work as partners. So we would like Afghanistan to be the arena for cooperation rather than confrontation. And I think the extended troika, which is China, Russia, United States and Pakistan, and the declarations that they have issued, which are consensus declarations, they reflect that broad consensus and recognition that conflict and instability in Afghanistan is not good for any country. And I think that provides a huge basis for these countries to continue to work in future also, because if things go south in Afghanistan, it affects China, it affects Pakistan, it affects Central Asian republics, Russia and others. So that is what we would like to see happen. So far as Pakistan is concerned, of course China has invested extensively in Pakistan, but then they came to us when no one else was coming. But that does not mean that we are close to others. Pakistan has made available these special economic zones to our friends in Germany, to our friends in the United States and in Europe. And we would like everyone to come. And we don't really necessarily see these as mutually exclusive.
Excellency, thank you very much for the interview. It's an honor to talk to you.